Thought we'd lead off by just going down the panel and saying who we are and what our relationship with web technology is, so that you can understand when we're providing our answers, like this is where this person is coming from. So how about we start down here?
All right, well, currently I've been working with WordPress.
Who are you?
Oh, hi. I'm Ricky McCallum. I've been working with WordPress for 4.5 years. Maybe 1 or 2 of those years was freelance for local small businesses. The rest was at an agency that was also working with small to medium to large businesses and just jumping from website to website, building with WordPress as the main tool, and having a full stack skill set so that when problems come up, I can jump onto them. It was a very small company I was working at, so everyone had their hands in every project, and so I'm just all the foundational web technologies, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and a lot of PHP for WordPress backend stuff.
Cool. I'm Matt Layman. I've been doing web stuff for a long time. I think my first website was in Microsoft Front Page, way back in the day. It was pretty awful. Like, I'm embarrassed by that code, but everybody starts somewhere, right? And I've been doing web professionally for a good number of years now. I'm a Python person, as you might guess. I'm the organizer for Python Frederick, so I'm big into Django as the web framework that I reach for. Although I've done Flask and a bunch of other stuff, I probably dabbled with them all to some degree, and use that professionally for my work. So I work in the healthcare industry, and it is a nationwide healthcare product that does telemedicine and a bunch of other things, which we can chat about later if we want to. But I think about big distributed web systems these days in my role, and the web is a complicated place, so I'm mostly swimming in that.
Hi everyone, my name is Riley Badawar. I work at Rocket Money. It's a personal finance management app. I've been in the web game since early 2018 when I graduated from a General Assembly boot camp. Ever since then, I've been doing everything from consulting work at Deloitte to working at a startup that, I kid you not, I joined in January of 2020 that was in the flight and hotel management for small to medium businesses. So that didn't last long. Currently, I mostly work with TypeScript on React Web and React Native. A lot of our stuff is pretty much TypeScript, but I'm recently getting out into some infra. I've taken on some work to do some to rewrite some of our deployments from Netlify to Nginx and web app. So that's fun. I code for fun a little bit in my spare time, but I mostly have a ton of other hobbies that I get into. So the majority of what I code is for work.
Cool. Hi guys, my name is Andres Mendoza. Started my web development career right out of college back in 2010 when I got a job here at Experian, which is an event industry company. Did a lot of stuff in ASP.NET, C# on the back end, and then HTML, JavaScript on the front end. Went into a little bit of the Angular side as well, and then sort of transitioned to a mobile engineer where I was doing iOS and Android development there. At the current time, I don't actually develop professionally. I manage developers and manage projects right now, but I still have a passion with technology and code.
So now the floor is yours. What questions do you have that you'd like to ask the panel and get our opinions on? Thank you, Lugene.
You know I have a million questions.
All right.
I've been going through many tutorials since the beginning of January, just trying to know how things work. And you learn something in one, and you go to another, and you learn something else, and you go to another, and some of them conflict with each other. Where do you learn how to do it in the real world? Where do you find out what the grown-ups do? Not just how tutorials teach you. Because some of the tutorials I look back and think, oh no, you never do that. But that's where they start you. So where do you go?
That's a good question. I'll repeat it for the recording. Where do you learn how to do web development in the real world? You want to start?
Sure. I think project-based learning is the way to go. And if you can find curriculums, or some people learn with video, they like that style of course. You have Udemy and all that. And then articles is another option. I absolutely love the Odin project, as an open source curriculum that's built by the students who went through it. So it's a collection of the everything in the right order from scratch, and it has projects along the way so that you can build a portfolio that has like actual real world use. The Odin project. Yeah.
Oh, I could also fill in. Yeah, I mean, thinking about this question, when I think about like if a developer asks, how do you get into development, kind of in line with that, I think like the ideal scenario, which it's not going to happen for everyone, is could I get a job that I am junior and then I'm learning from seniors there. But it's not just that too. It's you come into a framework already built and you see how things are done, how everything has been scaffolded, and you're learning through that. I think you could do the same thing with curriculums that are online. Start to understand that there are many different styles out there and start to build your own style, because in any problem, whether it's web development or just development, you can solve it 1,000 different ways. And you start to find that like you're going to develop a style that you like to do, whether it's good or bad. So I would say just understand that. Like if you can understand that there's styles out there and now you're learning how to, instead of conforming, because like you say, if you're going into one curriculum to another, you might see things that are conflicting, and some of it might be a style, some of it might just be how they kind of go out through the tutorials and stuff like that. So just understand that.
I think for me, the best way that I've found to learn is, of course, learning by example, seeing how others have built full things instead of seeing how others approach individual little atomic problems. Seeing something complete, seeing the whole picture of something, really helps my understanding. In fact, one of the best things I've seen recently, which is kind of working on small bits, but the way that they present it is really great. I am helping a friend migrate their website from Wix to a self-built solution. And I decided to learn Svelte. And I don't know if anybody here has tried to learn Svelte. Their docs are exceptional because every single thing that you can learn how to do in that is an example with a REPL that you get to go in and say, okay, they've told me how to do it, and now I get to do it. And if you get stuck, they have a button that'll show you exactly how to do it. So I think for learning how to get through something that's particularly tricky, seeing how it's done, for me at least, is great. And one other way that I've learned to love learning things is sheer spite. Just because I can learn it and I don't want to, and I wanted to show somebody. One joke that I always bring up is I'm not a fan of Python because I don't like white space as markup. I'm not a fan of that. So when I was at General Assembly, they had a day where they sent us off to learn anything we wanted. So I learned a language called whitespace and made a little app that just has 3 different characters in it: a space, a tab, and a new line. And like that was fun because I didn't have a reason to learn it. I'm never going to use it again. But I got my brain engaged in what I was doing just because I knew I could get through it.
It's interesting. My take on the real world is that the real world is probably just as messy sometimes as those tutorials that you see. A lot of companies put on a good front that they have their shit together, and they don't. So there's a lot of messes out there, and there's a lot of experiential stuff happening that you grow into the problems that your business is facing. And a lot of it is just an understanding that those companies, they managed to survive probably through some really painful experiences where they didn't write that thing that scaled properly, and then they had to go rewrite it in a hurry because they're getting crushed by their success, which would be a good problem to have, right? So in that regard, like learning on the job is, even being a professional and having getting the reps in and experiencing those problems over and over again and seeing the messes of the people that came before us. And I've created those messes. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm just as guilty as everybody else because I'm a learner too. So that's been my most effective means, is actually doing the job and just learning through some of the pain. Now, hopefully you can bypass some of that stuff. How do you skip parts of that? Maybe is a good way to think about that. And where you have learning websites, that's good. There are also some companies will basically post a lot of their code for their actual product online. I believe Sentry, if you're familiar with, is an error tracking service. I want to say most of their code is online. I could be wrong about that, but if not them, then there are other companies who demonstrate an example where they just say, look, here's all of our code for our website, and you can just go explore that. That can be difficult to do in the case where I don't know what I'm looking at, and that's the hard part. Like, the web is this very broad thing that has tons of layers to learn. Like, I'm currently teaching my son at home, and I'm starting to go with HTML, but I'm going to have to teach him CSS, and I'm going to have to teach him JavaScript eventually, and then there's a back-end language which may or may not be JavaScript, and then there's databases and SQL. Like, it's a big stack. It's a lot to learn. So I think we just bite off the pieces that we can, start to get them like under our belt, and then expand and expand over time. It comes to something that, oh yeah, I do see how these things fit together. I don't know when there's a magic point when all of that is like, oh, I understand, like a mega brain, and I've got it all, but it's a growth thing.
Yeah, and to go off Matt's point too, exactly that, right? Like, you can have a problem that you want to solve in a tutorial, and it seems pretty cut and dry. But if you take it into the real world or in a business sense, it's not as cut and dry, because one business may have a specific need that another doesn't. And it all really depends on what the business need is. Is it something that we can kind of skimp and get through as quickly as possible, just to deliver to the client and move on? I mean, the industry I worked in, I was working for events that were one and done. As soon as the event was over, you moved on, you go into next year to another client, and different set of business rules. So you sort of skimped in some ways just to get it to the client, and then you're good to go there. But I think another thing too is try to learn some of the fundamentals where that can translate to other languages. I think Riley was saying it too when she was exploring a different language. If you start to learn the fundamentals, you can start to pick up other languages pretty quickly and see the differences there, and then you recognize patterns and stuff like that. And I think that to another thing, when you start to see built solutions, you start recognizing patterns there and how they're playing.
Good question there, Gene. Thank you. Other questions you all have? Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to that mentorship was really helpful for me starting out in my career, finding someone that might know a lot about the thing you want to learn, and just getting their opinions on, hey, I'm doing this thing, is this kind of the right way to do it, or do you feel like this is the idiomatic way, right? So think about like Python, is this the idiomatic way to do this thing, or I'm building a website, is this something, maintainability, all these sorts of like best practices that you're maybe trying to learn, or how all fits together. Mentorship was so helpful for me starting out, and I cannot attest to that enough.
Well, that's a good point, especially when you're a new engineer coming into programming. Like, that's when you can get, a lot of these companies will have mentors. Like, I'm actively mentoring people at work as part of my job to help get them up level their skills, and it is a really rapid way to, because they can cut through all the baloney. And
Are you completely remote?
yes, I'm completely remote, so it's a virtual kind of session with the person. Yeah.
Do you have any experience with, I know that there are websites where you can hire mentors by the hour. Has anybody tried, I guess it's for anybody in the room, has anybody tried those and had success?
I've never heard of those sites before. It sounds pretty cool, but I'd say finding a mentor is not easy, right? It's one of the hardest things for anything, right? As I said before, the ideal situation is coming in as a junior and having a senior team that can tell you what the hell you're doing wrong, when you're doing stuff. But if you're learning, then I would say find groups like this. You're going to have people that are passionate, like Riley, like Matt, who like to code on the side, and get involved with the project. It doesn't matter if it's with Python or game development or something like that. Find a neat, people that are, interested in doing something similar. And in that case, you can say, hey, could I get involved in a project with you? And then you start to, do things there.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to like a few things that you guys are saying. I mean, I've been like the better half of a decade on like a bunch of different projects, and usually like when you get introduced to something, regardless if you're a developer, full stack, or front end or back end, at least in my experience, like you've always had to touch front end and back end. You know, especially if you're doing WordPress, right? You're touching
Yeah.
HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you're touching some PHP in the back end. Then you might still have to go look in the database and do some queries, right? Like one way or another, you're gonna be touching things no matter what. And I know it sounds cliche, but practice does make perfect, right? Like if you could just code a little bit, like make up a problem, or if you have like a site that you're passionate about creating, like just do it for funsies. And you know, you can then apply those same tactics to them in the workplace. But like you said, I mean, there's different companies do things differently. So you're gonna start developing these patterns too. But then some companies might just want you to band-aid things and just get it out to the client and you care what the back end looks like. There's probably no testing, no QC, nothing. But as long as the client likes it, it's okay.
Yep.
The back end might be a hot mess, but it works.
It works, right?
Yeah.
So that there's like a lot of different caveats to it all, I would say.
One of my favorite things about the software industry is, and some people don't want this, is that you have to stay successful with it, you have to be a constant learner. You have to always be growing and like, there's the depth of what you could know is vast. And that's not saying you have to be like an elite kernel hacker and like somebody who's a front end master that's doing like knows all the accessibility stuff. Like there's a spectrum there and where you live in that stack. But if you can expand those layers that you do know over time, then I think you become a more effective engineer. You're able to see through. It gives you an ability to look at a solution that's presented and be like, yeah, that smells fishy over there. Like you got this part down for sure, but yeah, this is no good. And that's a useful skill to have. So always be learning. Don't be afraid of documentation. I don't know. That's some folks like just don't read documentation. They don't read error messages. There's an easy one. Like they'll just kind of glaze over it. And I don't know. Reading is a lost skill, it seems. But that would be a good piece of advice too. Yeah.
I have something to share. Like years ago, so I worked like with phones years ago. It's like what you said is right. You have to constantly change and evolve. Like years ago, Palm or BlackBerry was the top operating systems. They ended up going obsolete. So it's like at one point there was Windows NT, Windows 98. All those things constantly change. So looking at new releases years ago, I used to look at like what was the top downloads in software. Like that was software I would try. It was like CNET. This is the top downloads, or this is the top browser. So I would like download that because it was like the top browser, the top video games, or the top console in sales. And I would get something like that. So I could learn like skills in terms of NIT. So that's something like I did years ago. Was always look like what was the top website, what was the top downloads on CNET. I would download that software and I would just like try it out. Because that's usually the way the trend in the industry is going. So you can look at like the top 10 programming languages that's being used right now in software. So the App Store has like top 10 in iTunes, or I guess it's called App Store, and then the Play Store. So looking at the top 10 languages that's using those, and then that's usually where the industry is going.
Have y'all heard of awesome lists that some of you have? If you want to learn a particular technology, there's, not in every circumstance, of course, but there's this pattern called an awesome list. And you can search for awesome Python, awesome React, awesome, and pair those two things together. And what you will probably land on is somebody who has basically put together a curated set of technology that here's the list of all the great packages that can go with Python categorized in these different areas of solving these different kinds of problems. So that's a really fantastic way to like shortcut learning too, is jump straight to somebody's opinionated take. And often that opinionated take is informed by the community. Like the people tend to rally around these things and say, actually this solution is better than this one. And so that if you're wanting to jump to what technology should I pair with this thing or that thing, look for an awesome list, and it might help guide you on, that's how I can make these two things work together.
I have a question. This is a fun one. So what do you all feel like is the most influential thing that's happened in web tech in maybe the last 5 years or so? Right, yeah, let's move it going.
I think for me, it's hard to pick just one thing. I watch a lot of like tech influencers on YouTube, and I follow a lot of tech influencers on Twitter. And like, I could just throw a dart at a board and land on something that will change some game in a small way. like the Signals API that's going to be coming out. That's sort of going to replace most state in 5 years. Might not. I have no idea. Web components could be another thing. Web assembly is certainly gonna be a thing that's gonna be bigger in the future. You could even argue that if web assembly is going to be a big thing, Rust is going to become a big web component in the future. As long as the Rust Foundation steps back from some of the changes they'd like to make.
Trademark stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But honestly, I think the thing that I like the most about it, and there are some that argue against this, is how much more accessible it's become to people that want to learn this stuff. It was a bit of I don't want to say a walled garden for a while, at least in the time that I have been an adult. It hasn't really been a walled garden. Anybody's been allowed to come in. But the idea of what makes somebody a software developer has changed significantly in the last decade at least. And so much of this tech makes it so easy to do things that were once considered incredibly difficult. And we're only getting better at it. Folks today look at React and specifically working with JSX and say, this is horrible, this is really ugly, nobody likes doing this anymore. And you look at something like Svelte and you're like, wow, this is pretty much just writing HTML and CSS if you want to. And then companies like Tailwind come out and they both make a really great and easy to use system of CSS styling and some managed options for if you want some of their theming. But seriously, for me, it's that I'm just so excited to see like the next generation of software and especially web engineers coming out, and some of the ideas that they have for how to improve the web and make it better for everyone that's using it.
I love what Riley said because I would have to expand that as well from 5 to 10 years because the entry barrier has come down so low in terms of trying to get into web development. Like when I graduated in 2009, you were thinking ASP.NET, with a SQL backend, or you can go with a Linux stack. And again, you got to roll everything yourself, and you're hosting on your desktop. And I've done that before. And now it's like I can go to Wix. I can put some code in there if I want to, or I can just use a WYSIWYG editor and I'm done. Or I can go to AWS and host it on an S3 bucket. Very simple. So the entry to barrier has come down extremely down to the point that it's awesome to see new things come up. And I think that bigger things are coming. It seems like it's slower, but as Riley said, people are saying React, and then I've done Angular, right? So that you have those camps there, but you didn't have that 10 years ago, and now you do. So it's amazing to see that.
You have any thoughts on this one?
Well, I'm most familiar with my pocket of the web, and WordPress and page builders, I totally agree, are just making accessibility to anybody who wants a website, your local business, $0, you're up and running.
Yeah.
And and then Gutenberg editor in WordPress's case, I don't know what time frame that came out in, but that's built on React now. So I feel like React is just, the thing to beat, right? So you have a lot of people doing interesting things trying to beat it, and that's cool.
Yeah.
I think where I would expand on that is to generalize that concept. So Gutenberg is like a headless thing.
Actually,
right?
It's just a page builder.
Okay. What I was thinking of, and maybe not the 5-year timeline that you're asking about, but the biggest thing that I've seen over the last decade, perhaps, is probably the rise of single-page applications and the separation, a stronger separation between front-end clients using the Reacts, Angulars of the world versus and having some sort of JSON API to back up those services versus a world that is more of a server-side rendered. And like the world's not that clear cut. There's been a lot of changes with how much of that single page application should be rendered on the server and then delivered there's been a lot of things to try and make that experience better because there are some disadvantages to single page applications. But I think that has been probably the one that I've seen influence the web design space the most. Now, I personally happen to think that the server side rendered stuff is making a comeback. Like there's a lot of complexity that has been added by having single page applications and having to build an API, and then in your front end app having to model a lot of the same things and replicate some stuff that doesn't really scale unless you have a team of a certain size. That's my take on it. So single page applications kind of enable, server-side rendered applications enable a smaller team to get something out to market a little faster, and it's causing a resurgence in frameworks like Ruby on Rails and Django and these things, especially as you see certain technologies like HTMX and Tailwind and these other things that kind of pair together to make server-side rendered easier to work with. Maybe it doesn't optimize time to first byte as much as some folks would like, but is a really powerful way to go forward. But I think the theme that I've been hearing from all of these folks is like the accessibility of the web, making it easier to get in from whatever the angle is for bigger teams, smaller teams, just little businesses that need to, host their fish store online or something like that. Like all of those folks have an entry into the web, which I don't think was there 5-10 years ago. It was much harder to do this kind of stuff.
And the one thing I would mention, I would say within the past 5 years, I've noticed would be no code or low code solutions that are probably taken off. Where if you guys aren't familiar with the concept, I don't need to code all these components. I can just drag and drop them, but there's still coding needed where I need to hook it up to an API or a backend or something like that. But it drastically cuts down on the fact that I have to put, some component on there and then tie it up and stuff like that, like with a single page application. So that I would say has been going up pretty high in the past 5 years.
To your point on server-side rendering, that's always been the tool of choice for performance marketing websites. So my company, for example, we use a managed solution with Webflow for our homepage that is all server-side rendered, specifically so that Google can crawl the site and index us correctly. Everything else we do is just plain old vanilla React, which is all client-side rendered. It ships big, it takes a while to render, and it is what it is. Svelte, on the other hand, I learned recently, they have a mix of solutions. The first render is server-side. And the reason they do that is for marketing reasons. If you want Google to be able to crawl your website, they can. Every subsequent render is client-side rendered for performance and making sure that things can load a lot more quickly than having to make a round trip to an API in order to get the next page. But the benefit is that things that used to be hard to do, like how do you get a header to know what page it's on, is trivial today. And companies like Vercel, who manage Next.js, are doing similar things where they're trying to merge server-side routing with client-side routing so that you get you write them both in the same place and you get the benefits of both worlds. It's pretty neat.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
How do you balance investing the time in learning these new tools and technologies with client deadlines and budgets?
I want to repeat the question. So how do you balance learning new tech versus client commitments and deadlines?
Yes.
Yeah. Great question.
Could make it a hobby. That's the easiest way, right?
You have a thought?
Like in my job or previous jobs, there's LinkedIn Learning. So anybody that lives in Frederick County, you can get a library card, you can get LinkedIn Learning. So you can search Six Sigma, you can search different type of cybersecurity, any type of topic you want to develop there. So you can do a few minutes, pause it, on a break or something like that. So it's a lot of companies do have LinkedIn Learning. It's by Microsoft, because Microsoft bought LinkedIn years ago, but they use a lot of Microsoft, there's Linux, there's a whole bunch of concierge or whatever that you want to study. Just type it in, search it. And anybody that's in Frederick County can get the free library card. And there's thousands of IT videos there by professional consultants and stuff like that. That's what I've done over the past few years. Is just I got 30 minutes, 15 video, and try to learn. And they can pause as well, so you can kind of pause what you've learned as well.
Well, I think to answer your question, more appropriately, is if you're looking, let's say, at a new language or something that you're interested in learning, the best bet to convince your employer is to convince them why going to that new platform would be much better for the employer, right? In the long run, it's not going to be an easy battle, that's for sure. You can't just go to your job and say, I want to go to Svelte from some other platform you've been using for years. It's like, how are you going to make a case out of that? But if you can slowly learn things and then start to understand why it's that much better and make that case there, then you can sort of really push your team. And I think you start to see developers, they're just naturally curious about things, right? So you're going to see, oh, there's new tech. What is it about? What is it trying to solve? As Riley said, it may solve one or two things that are annoying of what you're doing, whether it's an Angular or React. And that's where you start to say, well, what else is it doing that might, be better than what I'm doing currently? And if it's really something that you're interested in, you're probably going to be the champion of that anyways. I wouldn't have to convince you to do that. You're going to be the one telling your fellow developers, and then eventually your boss and your employers, I think we should do this because it'll save money here, or do this better. So I think that's the best way to balance it. It's like, you're not going to convince a company, to use a game engine when you guys are web developers, right? That's just not going to happen. So you're going to have to do that on the side.
I think one of the challenges, so earlier I was talking about being eager to and always learning. And that is the flip side of that coin is that it's a challenge for this industry. I would guess that if I was a dentist, I wouldn't be learning about dentistry stuff in my off hours late in the evening. I don't know, maybe there's some dentists out there that do that. Well, I might, but I'm guessing the typical dentist does not do that late in the evening. And our industry is kind of different in that way. So I struggle actually with what is the balance? What is the balance to expect an employer to be investing in your training directly? There's probably some obligation there, especially if they're the ones driving. We as the company want to move to this technology. We need you, developer, to be educated into this. So we're going to actively send you to a training or work you through some sort of certification, although certifications don't mean much in our industry. But we're going to do something to get you along that journey so that you can be effective on that team. But versus just I'm interested in learning a particular aspect of the web I think that might be something where you have to have that curiosity kind of outside of your daytime hours, right, and be looking at, I'm investing in myself, in my career, and growing that way. That's kind of a hard pill to swallow for some folks who may just want to be more of a 9-to-5er, and there are certainly good jobs out there for software developers who have more of that mindset. But I think if you really want to excel and advance, that you have to be willing to take on some extra stuff outside of hours.
I'll say I've never seen any of my companies offer training to employees. It's been promised a million times by all the companies I've worked for, but when push comes to shove, it's just well, yeah, that's something we're definitely going to do on the roadmap. We really want to, but no, you really have to just kind of do it on your own time. Another answer to that though is there's a lot of adjacent tools where if you are working on a particular tool that depends on other tools that are either written in a language or are more similar to the kind of work that you want to be doing, it's very, I find it easy to kind of convince myself I'm actually working, even though it's not exactly what I'm supposed to be doing right now, is to be looking into this open source library that we depend on and reading the docs and understanding how it works under the hood and that kind of stuff. Maybe even submitting issues and stuff to that. So that way I can get experience on the tools that I'm interested in, even though it's not me writing those tools isn't what I'm being paid to do. But it's close enough that I don't ever get in trouble for it, or at least how often I do it.
The other thing is you just have to budget some time in your day for self-teaching or self-learning. If you're going to learn a new tool, either you go to somebody else in your company and say, here, do this for me. Or you simply say, okay, I'm going to spend 25% of my daytime learning the tools that I need to do to learn to get my job done. So basically you just need to schedule it into your schedule. And when your boss tells you, I want you to do this, 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 and this, you can say, I don't have enough time. And part of that is because you allocate such a time to what you're, to the other thing you're doing. The problem you will run into, or at least I run into, is that everything becomes a priority and my self-teaching becomes a low priority. And it's a real struggle making that a high priority and actually putting it on your calendar.
And
Yeah.
hopefully you have a manager that is invested in your growth.
Right,
Like
right.
A good manager wants the people that work for them to be good employees so they can be effective, right? Like the manager succeeds when the individual contributors are working with them, like they're doing good work. So it would be to their detriment to be ignoring that completely. Now, sometimes there are schedule pressures, like for big important projects, and you might have to like shift how much allocation is happening there, but I would think that they'd want you to learn. If they're not, thankfully our career is so robust in like the need for developers that there are a lot of good jobs out there. So if you're like really stuck in a place where like you don't have any opportunity to grow and you're just being pushed to the max, like maybe that is a worthwhile consideration to find another career. I know that's like intimidating for some folks and it's a hard thing to think through, but that's the optionality that comes with software development, I think.
Yeah, and I think you have to be a champion of that, right, for yourself and for the team too, because if you really believe that the item that you're trying to learn would better the team, then why not push it? Keep pushing it to your boss, to the company, and stuff like that. And I agree with Matt. If you have a good manager, then if you came to me with something that was relevant to the business, that would make you a better developer, and you can teach that to other developers, I would absolutely try to help you with that. I would even pay for it. There's no reason why I wouldn't. If you don't, then that's just something you're going to have to work out with the current company that you have. And to what David's saying too, there might be some stuff that you're trying to learn that isn't really involved with your company, but that would, in the long term, make you a better developer. And that's your decision on how much you want to invest in yourself. I personally am curious, so I would always be looking at different things. I may not put 100% into it, but if I know enough that I want to keep going, I'll do that. If not, then I'm like, hey, it's not where I want to go.
Yeah, one thing I like to add is like going beyond your manager's responsibilities. There are some companies that are very well structured, and they're gonna want you to like keep track of, let's say you're working through billable hours, or if you're working through goals that you have to review on a quarterly basis. So you want to set your goals ahead of time, discuss these with your goal advisors or your managers, so that you have like setting up the expectation from the very beginning, like why you really want to focus your learning on specific topics. And that's basically going to help you if you're working for a company that is structured, because you have a set of goals that you need to work on. So that's going to give you like a head start as well, in my opinion.
So a lot of the time, the prioritization, it just comes down from the top. You don't have a lot of say in it. But if you want to get the best bang for your buck on making sure you have a wide picture, a breadth of knowledge of at least what's going on in the industry, I recommend Traversy Media. He does an annual State of the Web, and it's really good. This year it was like 3 hours, but it's usually just an hour. And you get a sampling of all the technologies that are in each part of the stack. It's really nice.
Cool.
Sorry, follow-up question.
Oh, follow-up?
Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
we'll go follow-up and then we'll go to Eugene over there.
I know some of you guys in the panel and also I guess clients have grown. How do you allocate a certain amount of budget or time whenever you approach a new project or learning new things? If you get handed down a legacy project or some new tool, in your case, for example, for WordPress, if they have a new page builder that you've never really been familiar with, do you allocate that time?
I actually do take those opportunities. So if I'm contracting with a company, this just happened recently, they have a favorite framework. Genesis is a page builder and framework and plugin, bless you. And so I had never touched it, never seen it before, but I didn't mention that. I just built it into the estimate and the quote and thought I'll put in the time during this and it'll be a new skill set I can carry with me, and they're paying for me to learn it. That's a good way to approach it, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think you'll get when you become more of a senior developer is the understanding of how to learn a lot quicker than before, right? I agree with Rookie. I mean, if I take on a client and I'm taking on something I don't know, I mean, I'll let them know, like, hey, I'm not an expert in this particular platform or framework, but, you know, I can get in there and learn. It's only going to make you a better developer, for one, and then two, you're going to be able to try to understand that problem a bit quicker as you get more and more under your belt from there. So it's just one of those things that's like, take on the challenge and just have a curiosity for it too.
Eugene?
Okay. This is a two-part question. I have a pet project that I've been working on since I started these tutorials in January. So that's my frame of reference for what I'm learning, is trying to make this work. And it's a website. So I'm thinking about at what point should a website also become an app, an iOS and Android app? What's the benefit of, like, for example, if you go to Lowe's.com, they try to push you into their app. Well, what's that do for me? What's that do for them? So that's the first thing. Second thing is, whether it's an app or a website, talk to me about monetization.
Okay, I could help answer both those questions. When you're thinking about converting from a web to an actual phone app, you gotta ask yourself, like, why? I mean, the easiest thing I would say is do a web app instead, right? Because you can just go on the website on your mobile side or on the desktop and you solve. Make it responsive. But when you think about Lowe's, I personally use the Lowe's app too. And one of the things that you can do on the app is I can scan a barcode, or I can use my GPS to see where's the nearest store. So when you start to get into capabilities like that, like native capabilities, that's when you start to ask yourself, is it necessary for me to get a phone application there? And I've wrestled with that in the event industry too, when I became a mobile developer, where we were developing using JavaScript and putting out there. Then this is before some of these like low-code solutions came out, and we needed to hook into the native capabilities, but we were coding most items on the web instead. And so that was our answer there. I think since 2015, 2016, I was doing that. iOS has changed a lot of their policies there, where they don't really allow for something like that. They want you to go native, and there are frameworks out there where I can code in JavaScript and then it ports it to a native code and put it out there. But if you want to dabble into that just to test it, I would say sure, but you really want to have a high bar if you're trying to solve a business sense why you want to go there, because most likely it's unnecessary, like you're thinking.
So where would I go to find out what are the native features that I would be looking using? What I should be considering?
I'll let you
Yeah.
answer.
So our app was an app first, and in the last year we released a web client to go with it. I think that if you look at some of the stuff that our app can do, we have to when you sign up for our app, you give us your bank account info, and we scan through everything you've bought in the last year, and we make decisions based on that, how to let you know like what kind of subscriptions you have, what kind of bills you have, how much money you're spending every month. There is a lot of stuff that happens server side that you don't see as the user of the app. And there's a lot of stuff that an app is better for the type of thing we do. I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is I don't believe you can send native push notifications from a web app. I can't imagine why you would want to do that. So the big thing is that we send you alerts when you've overdrawn your account, or when you have a bill coming up, or when you've made an excessively large purchase on Legos or something. Because the entire point of the app is to help you manage your own money and grow your wealth with time. So there's a lot of stuff that we do that an app is good for. More things I can think of are background stuff. So if you have things that happen on the phone, they can happen while the app is not in the foreground. We can make sure that your accounts are up to date, so the next time you open the app, everything is fresh and waiting for you. There's a lot of different types of interactivity that you can get with an app too that you just can't get on the web. Web is very stack based. You go from one screen to the next and backwards, and there's maybe a little bit of jumping around to different flows, but it's all very linear. In our app, you could go from looking at how much money you have in your account to applying for a credit card, and then back to check out your how much you spent eating out last week. And it's much less stack based and more kind of just go where you need to go next. The reason I think we took so long to do a web client is because most folks have their phones in their pockets on them at all times, and probably aren't going to open up Chrome or Safari to go check out how much money they have in their bank account. They want to hit a button, look at it, and put their phone away. So there's definitely like an ease of use part of it. That comes from having a native app. Now, of course, it does come with its own challenges. If you decide to go with the native route specifically, you have to learn 2 different languages if you want to put it on both iOS and Android. We do use React Native, so we have that advantage, but it is not the same thing as writing in React. The basics of the language are the same, but it's only about 80% similar to writing web React. Some might say it's even a little bit harder. But it paid off for us because more folks were willing to use our app because they knew they were getting it from a safe place, right? It's in the App Store. The app stores are very clear up front. We scan everything so that, we're pretty sure this is safe. Not always the case. Sometimes things get through. But when you're looking through the App Store and you're looking for something to help you manage your money, if you see our app there next to Mint, you probably know, like, okay, yeah, this is a safe app to get. This has a couple million installs, and go from there.
Yeah, and there's some apps out there that started on native side and went to web. Robinhood is one of them. That they had a very heavy native app there, and then started to go to the website, and then now they have a pretty good web front there. But if you're just asking, like, when is it a good time to go back and forth, it really depends on what you're trying to solve. You can start on the web and eventually port to mobile apps. You can start on mobile apps and go back, or just stick to one and whatever's good. As Riley is saying, for her business case, it was better to start on the mobile side and then work your way backwards there. If you're wondering, like, what native capabilities are you thinking of, I mean, the simple thing would be push notifications, using the camera for anything, whether you're scanning a barcode or taking a picture, your GPS, and then there's a couple other things that are there, but that's pretty simplified list if you're wondering if you need a native app or not. So,
Couple things. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say your second question for monetization. There's plenty of different frameworks for that. So it all depends on what kind of app that you have. The biggest, easiest would be a subscription-based model if you're looking to really make money, versus when native apps first came out and you just paid $1.99 and then you were done. That's not really the thing anymore.
So I think I'd highlight a couple things about what the two of them just said. One is the strategy element, is the app first, web later. That path, like, already created the right structure to have a native app, because in order to have the native app, there's some API. Riley mentioned, like, a lot of server-side work. Well, the reason that server-side work is possible is because there must be, I presume, an API in place between the actual native client and then the backend that is doing a lot of this heavy lifting. And that path enabled that to happen, and then building a web out on top of that is something where you could then use a single page application technology like a React or an Angular and use the existing APIs that the mobile client used to build out a multiple client ecosystem. The other thing that I wanted to point out, that something that I heard Riley say over and over again, is us and we and those kind of words. I think it's important to recognize that if you're thinking about going into the app building space, there is the technology jump of, now I need to potentially know Swift and Kotlin and web tech and backend technologies, and so you've multiplied the surface area
exponentially. You're out there,
complete, at least by like 3 or 4, which can be really challenging. Which is why, like, hammering on that plural aspect of having a team is probably what was required to make that happen.
Yes,
because
yeah.
To ask an individual person to try and take all that on, it's possible. I'm not saying it's not, but to do it well is going to be a really hard proposition. So that would, so if you're a person who's in a constrained space where, hey, it's just me or me and one other person, you might want to look at the web only route just to keep it manageable for a small team of 1 or 2 people. So it really depends on the context of, is this a startup that's got some capital invested in it, and we're planning to make a business and we're starting for the strategy and going to expand out that way, versus a hobby project that like started out on the web and you want to take it a different direction to expand into mobile clients, because that could be a pretty heavy transition.
Yeah, I mean, as easy as it is to install an app now, it's a pain in the ass to develop, and it really is a pain to get it out there. Yeah, and to even get it out there, because there's an approval process on the iOS side, which, I mean, I helped my client release a product out there, and we failed 3 times in a row, and like our first time just trying to get it out there. Google also has an extensive, review process, but once you get it through, you're pretty good on that front. So it really increases the your risk on trying to get some solution out there.
But I would also say monetization on an app it's a really, really competitive space, and it, I mean, I can't think of any app that I could build that would make money on the App Store, because I know that if I thought of it, then
Somebody else has.
10,000 other people
Yeah.
are doing the exact same thing around the world. But as far as like actual monetization of development as a single person, I think the best bet is like if you know like a business that has a bunch of spreadsheets that are getting out of control and they can't manage all that anymore, and they like are looking for some like specific solution, and like trying to develop like a business focus app that like this solves like this very particular thing that only like laundromats in the state of Maryland care about, or something like that, which like very
Niche.
very niche.
Yeah, yeah.
That can be like a way to monetize it, and then that you have somebody who's not going to be paying you like $2 a month. They're going to be paying you like $20,000 a year or something, and like so there's obviously there's 2 different sides of that, but like I feel like most of the we're going to make an app that like it's going to work because we have like 10 million plus users using it, and all 10 million users are going to give us $1. Like those are pretty much all like eaten up, I feel like. And the ones that are still game are the ones that are like small real businesses that you have a relationship with and can solve like a problem for them.
I think the best monetized app I've ever heard of was an app that when you launched it, all it did was show you a picture of a diamond. And they charged the customers $10,000 for that. Guess how many people actually bought that? 10 people bought that.
It's $100,000.
Wow.
And it did nothing but showed you a picture of a diamond. But like as David is saying, you probably can't do that anymore.
Yeah, that's crazy. So in the realm of the software business stuff, there are some good resources out there if you're interested in like, how do I get into that? Because it's a tricky space to navigate. So one that I might recommend to you is there's a podcast that's called Startups for the Rest of Us. The host is a gentleman named Rob Walling, and one of the things that Rob talks about is a stair-step approach into business. And the idea behind that is like, a lot of people want to jump to a software as a service as the last thing. Like have an app, have subscription modeling, like build all that stuff. That's a lot of work. And so what's recommended in that stair-step approach is like, how do I work up to that as a software business and learn some of the business aspects, and then have the software component be lesser? Because actually making a successful business requires a ton of business acumen that the average software developer probably doesn't have. So that might be building a WordPress plugin, or going to a Shopify marketplace and building something for that ecosystem, like picking a niche ecosystem that has a marketplace in and of itself. So you're not competing on the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store or any of those spaces, but you're actually looking at like, how do I solve a business problem? And even though David commented that all of those good ideas are taken, there's room for competition in those spaces. That if I find a crap product that people are not happy with, because I can look at the reviews and hey, this plugin is really popular, but people don't like it. Like, is there something I could do there? So that there's an entry point in there, but it's a different path from like, I built a web app and I want to get that going. But that's a good resource for you. And I think Rob has some good books out there that if you want to look at that, explore that process. I think there's a lot of people that have succeeded by taking that stair-step approach.
And I would say, like, I love the way you described that, Matt, because that's sort of where I'm at personally in my career. I've done a lot of software development before, and now I'm really trying to learn on the business side of how do you sell things, not as a sales guy, but how does a technology solution fit to a business problem properly, right? And then push that forward. The best example I can give you for me personally was about 10 years ago, actually, 2013. I redid the website for Tasting Room, and I remember getting that contract and then hiring 2 other guys to help me both on the branding and design side and then on the software engineering side as well. And we over-engineered the hell out of this thing unnecessarily. It's a restaurant. I mean, a WordPress site would be perfect for this thing. Nope, we did an ASP.NET website with a C# backend, SQLite database for all this stuff. And I look back on that, and it's one of those things that, like, you look back and it's like almost cringeworthy, right? Like, why did I do that? Why did I leave my team to even do that? One of my developers wanted to learn this cool new thing on the C# side and stuff like that. So it was one of those things that, when you're young, you just want to learn, you want to do stuff, and you don't realize, like, I could have saved a lot of time and money if I would have just done a WordPress site and teach the client how to get in there, make some adjustments, move on, and that was it. So things like that, it's like in your career as a developer, you start to see that, like, you may want to over-engineer something that does not need that, and that was my mistake, 10 years ago when I did that. So
that kind of leads into what I want to ask you, and that is, I'd like you to define or explain why you need a web server and a website as opposed to a bunch of HTML documents that are hyperlinked to each other.
Well, sometimes your solution is the right one.
Yep.
Like I run a personal blog. So there's a whole category of tool out there. It's called a static site builder, where you can author your content in like in pseudo CMS like fashion, and then it has essentially a build step that builds all the HTML pages, and they all link to each other properly. And you dump it up on some hosting. You connect a domain name to it, and you're in business. And like, that thing can scale like crazy because it's just some HTML pages, right? So for the right problem, static site builders are fantastic tools. When I would reach for a web server, is more like I have to do something dynamic. I have to keep track of some state. I have to integrate with third-party services to send emails or do notifications, whatever it is. That's when I start reaching for heavier tools in that. And that's just my own personal bias. Andres has mentioned like no-code tools. There's a much easier entry point for many of these tools. It's like you could set up a WordPress site, you put in some plugins, you hire a guy like Ricky, and he'll help you out and get some of that kind of stuff going. There's a lot of paths that don't require building from scratch at that web server layer. Some do. Some of the problems are hard. There's nobody's got their no-code solution that will scale out to millions of users that are really slamming it with a lot of traffic, unless you're willing to pay through the nose. So it really, I think, depends on the problem you're trying to solve.
yeah, I mean, if it's a static page, you could just throw a single page application on S3 bucket, put it on CloudFront. You're paying little to nothing for that. But I think most people expect a site that's more dynamic, right? That you're feeding it some information, it's processing it, and is delivering something else back to you, right? Even if you think about like the restaurant website, that is probably the most static I could think about right now, but someone has to go back in and modify the website for, whether the menu or something like that, or even if I'm uploading a PDF of the menu, where is that going to get stored? And that adds a bit more complexity than just a static website now, right? If it was static, someone can just go in and modify the HTML. They're good to go, but that's probably not going to happen, right? So
there are tools so there's the kind of a space in there of a front-end client that's connected to like Firebase, which is now I think it's owned by Google now, is that right? But it's a data storage, and it's kind of viewed as this lightweight, easy to get into data storage, and it allows for that dynamic behavior that is often needed without necessarily needing to go build out a whole, let me spin up a SQL Server, Postgres database, and get my web server running and get that all on AWS and do all of that rigmarole. Like sometimes you can lean on some of these third-party tools to kind of fit in for the kinds of solutions you want to build. So it's this massive spectrum of, do I want to go own the entire life cycle of everything, or do I want to have a Wix site where I've signed up and I've got my restaurant business on some hosted thing where I've used a theme and I don't have to think about it. Like there's a lot of niceness to that as well.
Yeah,
So
it's 99.9% uptime. You don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
You're good to go.
Speaking about static site builders, I'm trying to personally build a personal blog right now. What technology or platform would you recommend for that in 2023?
Whichever one you want to learn. I have built I know, it seems like the cop-out answer. Anytime I find something like that, I usually reach for something that sounds cool. Early in my career, I learned Vue, but that was Vue 2. And I liked it, but I never really got an opportunity to use it. And so I built my personal site last year in Vue 3 as just a way to learn Vue 3, and it was very fun to work in. Like I mentioned earlier, the site that I'm building for my friend now is written in Svelte. There's no real reason I picked it other than, hey, it's the language of the day, and I would love to learn how SvelteKit works as like a framework. Really, I think the biggest thing to consider is, are there going to be diminishing returns for the thing that you learn? If you want to build a site today on ASP.NET, if that's around still, do you know C#? If you don't, then you have an entire language you have to learn in order to do that. Are you familiar with React? That might be the one you go with if you know that you can iterate quickly and get something up. Or are you willing to push yourself a little bit more? If you know React, you know HTML, you can reach for things like Vue or Svelte, which are more closely aligned to how HTML and CSS are written vanilla, with all the smattering of interactivity and reactivity built in. I don't want to say there's no wrong answer. There are certainly a handful of wrong answers to that question. But there are so many right ones that it's really hard to go wrong.
I would say ASP.NET C# would be the wrong answer. Wrong answer right there.
Cold Fusion.
yeah, I think a lot of it depends on the goal you want. So static site generators, I've run the gamut. I built my own once upon a time. Yes, you can go find it on my GitHub profile, and I ran on it for years. And I've used Jekyll and let's read the docs stuff for just documentation sites, Hugo, like just a bunch of them. And for me, what I've come down to, like with my site, it's like I'm optimizing for, I want low friction. I want to be able to have, I don't know if you've dealt with Jekyll before, but dealing with Jekyll means I'm dealing with Ruby now, and like having Ruby installed. So I wanted a tool that I could download easily from a new computer, not have to think about it. And my choice in that area was Hugo. It has some good theming capabilities. It's written in Go. It's super fast. And I guess that's somewhat of an endorsement for Hugo. But again, it comes down to like, what do you want on your site? Because if your site needs to have like dynamic elements to it, like you might want, I'm drawing a blank on some of these other ones that are out there that are in the JavaScript land for static site generators, but you can do kind of like React components and do
Next.js.
Next.js. Yeah.
Does that have like
I was thinking Gatsby. That's what I was
Gatsby
thinking.
is another one.
Gatsby is like you can have like dynamic components that kind of live on there. They can make API calls out, but they're mostly static. So that kind of takes it a little bit closer to that rich front-end application. But it comes down to like, what do you want on your personal site? If you're just writing some blog posts like I do, then a Hugo site is like amazingly convenient for that. But if you're needing to do some cool what's that? The JavaScript library for making really fancy graphics. It has a really
D3.
D3. Thank you. That is like brain busting, but can make some really cool stuff. You might need to reach for a different tool set.
Right, and I love that you brought up Jekyll because that's exactly what I'm trying to get off of.
Okay.
Because I still never installed Ruby and all
Right,
that
so
stuff.
it was like, Ruby.
Yeah.
You can also use Jekyll with Docker if you don't want to install Ruby.
Well, yeah, it's probably gotten easier because of Docker, but then you have to learn Docker.
Yeah, so then you gotta learn Docker. Right?
I can tell
Yeah.
You want to start
It's
with
an easy one.
something.
Yeah, if you want to
There are
have a
tons
dynamic
of
back end,
resources
for sure.
to do different things with a lot.
And then WordPress is a fantastic blogging tool.
Well, that's what I said. I'm not like a WordPress evangelist or anything. Honestly, you're here at a tech meetup, so you're into the tech.
Yeah.
You're not just a writer, and you don't want to divorce yourself from the tech to get to the writing. I totally agree with Matt. Hugo is awesome. It gets you up fast, and along the stair-step lines that you were talking earlier, it gets you writing and live and doing what you wanted to do day one.
Yeah.
And then, build from there. Hugo has great documentation too.
They do. Yeah, it's a pretty great tool. Yeah.
Okay, so I think you've all kind of mentioned a little bit of your own like freelancing experience, and so I'm kind of curious for you all, how do you sort of land that contract? Like, talk about, tasting, right? I've been to that website, I've gone to that restaurant, but it's like, how did you land that? What is that experience like? How would you, someone who's trying to do more freelancing, how would you encourage them to help them kind of succeed in that and be more successful in that?
Yeah, I'm networking, right? Like I knew the owner's wife. Her and I served on a board, back then, and she knew her husband was looking for modifying the branding and the website and everything, and she knew my background, and that's how I landed it. So it sort of landed on my lap, But I think networking too. So getting to know people, seeing what solutions you can offer and things like that, and sometimes some things are projects that you're just kind of helping out people. Other times they'll turn into something that are business opportunities.
Yeah, networking. So always be talking about the fact that you're available to do it, and put yourself in situations where a lot of people who would be interested in that are. So I organize WordPress Frederick, and I'm not looking to drum up clients, but they ask and they want, and I'm turning them away because I have too much work. That's where it all is. If you can help with a single problem they have and show your expertise, and they enjoy working with you and talking to you, that's the door's wide open.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have opportunities. Like we have the open workshop that we run on that once a month thing. There are a lot of people, it's on the WordPress calendar, so there are people who just like randomly come in that have their own little side business that they need help with something. I don't know if that's translated to anything for you in terms of actual like business opportunities, but I imagine that events like that have that component where you can meet people that are in need of some kind of services and make those arrangements.
Do you have any favorite flow charting or process for taking things from I know nothing, but I want a website and build it for me, where you flow chart, you ask me questions, flow chart everything, and get it all the way down to actual code pieces or the actual structure? Do you have any tools like that that are favorite tools of yours for taking through the whole process? I mean, I'm using Visio for flowcharting right now, but that's kind of like, I'm looking for something that'll let me start high and get deeper.
So you're not asking for like, do I have a favorite flowcharting tool? You're asking like, what's my decision process for the type of website that I'm picking?
Well, both questions actually. I'm actually wondering if there's like a good flowcharting tool that goes deeper than Visio. At the same time, I'm asking, what is your personal process? And I assume it's going to be different for each one of you a little bit.
When you say deeper, what do you mean by that, though?
Well, I mean, eventually you're going to want to have a full website and documentation and code and the whole thing. So how deep can you go, with a particular set of tools, or how does your process work from the top all the way down? There's waterfall models. There's what do you call it? Incremental delivery.
Agile, right?
Agile, all that good stuff. But how do you actually carry that through the entire process?
It's a good question. I mean, for me, if I were to sit with you and you had a problem, I take in as much as I can and think through it as best as possible. As far as like getting it on paper, that's not like a easy one sit down to do, right? Where, for example, I was in a startup at the beginning of the pandemic, and a couple months before that, And we're talking about how are we going to break up this massive problem of a native app that we're trying to do. And it was a game for iOS and Android. And some documentation was done, initial requirements, initial things like that. But the process was pretty, it happened as the team grew, right? Where I knew where we wanted to go in terms of the endpoint of a product, but how to get there and certain features that we're trying to hit, it was very dynamic on, if we hired a game developer, now we can do this, and this. If we hired at first we only had a backend developer. So I can only do things that he would develop, the back end with API components and stuff like that, maybe test it out. But, you have for me personally, I would have a high level picture of what we're trying to accomplish. And then you break it down, as best as possible. It's not a one sit down for me. And we did use Scrum and Agile to do that. So, we've iterated over and over and over in terms of that. Now, in terms of tools, I've used Visio before, but I've probably used Draw.io for something like that. Miro's another one that's very similar. That's a visual and how you want to break it. But again, what I would probably do is just have something pretty high level. And then as I understand the components that we're working on, then I start, making those and start having things connect. So, and then all the documentation happens on other things. There's no one size product that will solve all that. For me, Notion was a good wiki for our team that we utilize and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, we use a combination of Notion, which I think is great for long-term storage of thoughts and ideas. And sharing stuff with everyone else. We use Figma for our designs, and we use Shortcut for I don't actually. I'm embarrassed to say, but in this game so long, I don't know what kind of board that is. A card and column board. I've never thought for reaching for a diagramming tool to lay out how I want a website to be done. But I love the idea of. Is it a Kanban board?
Yeah, it's Kanban.
Yeah. Yeah. So for a lot of my own stuff, I use Trello at home. I am converting a bus into an RV. I'm using Trello to record everything that I need to do in order to get this thing ready to take out onto the road. And we use Shortcut at Work, which is effectively the same thing, just more robust. So those are probably my tools.
Yeah, your question is very multi-layered. I'm trying to get to because it's I think for me, when I'm thinking about website development, there's not a flow chart that I just start from. I think I start with a little bit, without going into too much waterfall, that's not what I'm after, but there's got to be a little bit of requirements collection, use cases of what am I trying to solve here? And that informs a lot of my decision making. And then after that, I'm a big fan of checklists, simple GitHub issue lists on a repository to start. It's pretty low tech in that regard. When it comes to actually doing flow stuff, these days I guess I'm reaching for Mermaid, which is built into GitHub. It will render, so it's a text-based thing, which is why I like it, because you can version control your diagrams, and you can. Cool. And then GitHub will natively display it. You create this mermaid diagram, you use the triple backtick syntax that comes in Markdown files that's very common in GitHub, and you drop in here's my flow diagram description. It's usually A, arrow B kind of stuff, and you put in some arrows of just a bunch of things that you want, and it will automatically create some blocks there. There's a little online renderer if you don't want to commit some flow that you aren't sure is working yet, so you can kind of check it. I'm sure there are probably plugins for VS Code. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'd be shocked if there weren't. So those are the flow tools that I would reach for, just because I value version control to such a level that I want to be able to see the history of if I changed a flow, what changed about it. That's kind of useful for me. So, but again, that's sort of divorced from how do I actually make my choice about am I choosing a static site, or am I choosing something that's vendor built, or doing it all myself? I don't typically use a flow diagram to inform that decision.
I think Agile already was mentioned, but if you're not familiar with Agile and some of the foundational ideologies that make up agile development. I think that's worth understanding. And really at the core, it's basically like, what's the smallest amount you can do to show to someone and say, is this what you need?
Yeah.
And like, no? All right, well, I have to do it again. Is this what you need? No. Okay, well, at this point, I guess I have to start over because now I can't do the third level, so let's take a step back and now get, is this what you need? And like, just really like iterating as fast as possible, and not like coming with like some grand like 10-year plan to deliver the perfect website for them. That's, I mean, I like the company that I'm working for right now, if like, I was talking with another developer there, and he's like, yeah, I don't think any of the code I've written in the last 10 years still exists. It's like every single thing you write, within a year, somebody else is going to write something on top of it if it was successful.
You got to launch it into space. My code's still running up in space. That's one way to
But you know, if your code is successful, that means it needs to change, and it needs to get like, you need another layer on top of it and throw you away. So like it's just constantly changing. So.
I have the exact opposite problem. I've written code, or I had to design a code or code something that I designed, and the idea was, okay, here's phase 1. We're going to go to phase 2 and do all of these improvements. And once phase 1 hits, it's like the customer saying, do not change anything, absolutely not. 10 years later, do not change it.
That happens, yeah. Yeah, people, if it's not broke, why fix it,
Yeah,
right?
it depends on the industry, I guess.
Yeah.
We are coming up on over an hour of discussion, and it's been great. I want to thank you all for that. But I also want to respect your time this evening. So let's do like one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap up this. And I guess if we'll stop the recording at least, and if you want to hang around and ask some more questions, I'm sure we'd be happy to do that. But I want to make sure that y'all can get out of here at a reasonable hour as well. So any like final question or two that we have for the panel?
I don't know if this is a good last question, but with the developments in ChatGPT and whatnot,
I knew the AI question was coming eventually.
Yeah. Well, nobody asked that. So we've been using Copilot for about a month now, and I've been starting to like try some of these things in our flows at work. How have you been either using it or not using it, and what like are you worried about that, how it's going to shake things up? Are you not worried? I guess like what's your take on it?
We recently did a hack week at work, and one guy on our team went through and hooked up our Notion workspace, our Slack workspace, and I think even some of our code into one of the new fun APIs that you can use to connect to GPT. So we now have a Slack bot that is GPT enabled. And it is hilariously bad. It gets things right, but it's wrong in the most obvious ways a lot of the time. And I hear this a lot, that the tech is really cool. It's really good at ingesting a large amount of stuff and predicting what it thinks the correct answer to your question is. But the more you look at it, that's really all it is. It's really good at predicting what you want to hear next. And do I think it's going to shake things up? Yes. Do I think it's going to take over the world? Absolutely not. Am I worried that my job is in danger? I'm a senior engineer. If I thought that my job was in danger because of a chatbot, I'm not very good at my job. Can it be used for some things? Absolutely. I was doing some terminal command the other day. I think it was, I never learned how to use sed. And so I asked it, I'm like, how do I use this? What do I type in here to accomplish the thing that I want? And after getting it wrong 6 times, it eventually taught me how to use sed. It was great because like I could not read the man page for this at all. It was just like wall of text. It was tired. I was like, whatever, I'm going to put this into this tool and see what I get. Copilot is sort of the same way in that it's, again, really good at predicting what it thinks you need or what you want. But is it Is it a great tool to have? I think depending on the kind of engineer you are, it can be. Should you let a junior engineer anywhere near it? Absolutely not.
I'll answer that question like from two different dimensions. One's from a company point of view. So I'm in a healthcare company, and we care about protecting your data. Like, it is the end of the world for us. Like, legally, like HIPAA would require us to disclose to everybody that we screwed up if we share personal health information and personal identifiable information. So if you read the terms of use of a lot of these services and you're like sending them data, we absolutely cannot send them anything that might make them useful. Like, their predictive capabilities, you can imagine a world where we could feed them a bunch of stuff about what we know about our patients and members, and that those predictive models can come back and try and inform, like, how can we make better healthcare decisions and enable doctors to make better choices. Like, I think that power is there, maybe not yet, but it's there. But as long as it is like somebody else's model and running on somebody else's computers, like, it's just a no-go from a business use case for us, because of privacy concerns. At like a personal level, how have I been using it? I've not personally been using Copilot, but I have. One thing I found that I was good at the other day is I was like, what's the cron syntax for running this job at this frequency? And I just, like, rather than trying to actually engage my brain on this, I just fed it that I want this cron schedule. Can you tell me what that is? And it's like, boom, here it is. And it was right. Like, I did go back, and the other part about it is, like, you need to verify the correctness of it. So to Riley's point about wouldn't give a junior engineer, wouldn't trust them to have that because they can't differentiate between the right and wrong. Whereas my experience is like, I could have gone and looked up the reference, and now that I see it, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that feature now. And so I trust that answer. So that's one way that's been useful. I've also used it very briefly as like a better Stack Overflow, that I've asked it some questions of, here's the context, and I think it was actually pretty good about providing context, and I didn't have to wait for responses from Stack Overflow questions for a very specific problem. And again, I had to validate, like, okay, you told me this, are you actually right? And it was mostly right. So I had to tease apart the right from the wrong aspects of it, but it did save me a bunch of time, it gave me like some API names that I wouldn't have known what to search for necessarily. So once I had those names, okay, now I have a thing that I can go Google and quickly jump right to the documentation that I cared about. And then that was where the validation step kicked in to see that it was right. And I predict, my guess is that over the next few years that just like we saw it get way better at passing the bar exam, its predictive capabilities for code stuff is going to get a lot better, and there would be a lot less time validating. I'm still not concerned about it with my career at this point, because I think a successful software developer 5 years from now will be using these tools to aid the development. The world's going to need more software. It's not needing less. And these tools, I don't think, will be smart enough to just replace complete software systems. So it's going to be, I will be able to produce a higher output of software to serve the missions that I need to at the companies that I'm at. And it's going to be a tool to help me do that.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, it's like when I first started my career and you ran into a problem, you would Google it, Stack Overflow, stuff like that. But you would never just take a solution from there, copy paste it, and expect it to work, right? It just wouldn't do that. Never. Right? So it's just one of those things. As a good developer, you start to see the patterns. Like, how do they solve this? Is it similar to my problem? Can I take pieces of that and then apply it here? And I think what GPT does now is enables you to give context to then give you a better scope solution for what you're looking to do. And a good developer would understand, is this output going to help me solve my problem or not? Or can I test it, or things like that? So I think it's going to be a very good aid for developers and plenty of other industries out there too. If you're a developer that thinks it's going to take over your job, then I agree with Riley, you're probably not really a good developer, right? Like, so I really do think it will aid developers and others in the future. The way I've personally used it, at least initially, I know one of my developers has used it to solve very specific problems, as Matt and Riley has said. I've used it as a way to just generate test values for me. So, you know, in the event industry, I just need exhibitors and attendees. So just come up with these names and companies, emails, and all that. Literally just copy paste it in there because I just don't want to think about doing that. So it's a pretty good tool to do that.
You know, with Copilot, what's probably been my best thing so far is like you write a test, like function name, and then like a real brief description in the docs string, and wait a second, and it poops out something. You're like, that's close enough for me to work with.
Right.
And then kind of go from there. But
Yeah, unfortunately, it's that close enough isn't good enough for a lot of software engineering. You have to get it right, or else the code isn't going to work. Anytime I think about whether or not LLMs are going to like take over the world, I think about the story that came out, I think it was 2 years ago, about a guy out in San Francisco, one of these like obscenely rich people. Was one of the first to get the self-driving features in his car. And he was arrested because he was laying in the back seat reading a book while his car was going 80 down the interstate. And he got out of jail. They towed his car. He went out and bought another car and did it again and got arrested a second time. And I think to like if you look at where this has come today, Tesla specifically has had some incredibly smart engineers working on how to solve this problem of, can a car drive somebody somewhere on its own? You could call it a problem because you could easily pick like an emergency situation. Car, take me to the ER, please. But after years and years of saying it's coming next year, by the time it finally came, cars are going 90 on city streets and hitting things and people and stopping in the middle of a tunnel, which I think was one that happened recently, and it was like a huge pileup behind it. At the end of the day, you're going to need somebody sitting behind that wheel to take it when it inevitably messes up. And I think the same can be said for AI that is used to write code. It, like you were saying, it'll be a great benefit that you don't have to do all of the work yourself, but you still got to be there because you know it's going to screw up eventually.
And AI is a very loose term here, right? It's very surface level because ChatGPT doesn't really know what it's saying, just predicting the next best word, and that's really it. So I see a lot of sensational articles about it's going to take over the world or do this or hustle GPT. It's like it's not really thinking for you. What I do think is really nice about these language learning models is it might be an entry point into how we can interact with deeper models like Matt was talking about, where you can have a specific model for healthcare that can do things like that, but how do you really interact with it? Now it's pretty technical to do that, but if I could have something that I can interact with, as I'm interacting with you, and it can understand me to some level, I have a better chance of really diving into that data set and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of see that happening with the language learning models, but it's not, like I said, it's very surface level right now.
I think one more thought that I had on it is, so I was chatting with my wife actually asked me the same question. I'm the sole worker in our home. She works in many other ways, taking care of our children and like raising them and teaching them and all of this sort of stuff. So since I'm the one bringing in the bacon, figuratively, she asked me like, well, should you be concerned with your work? And I think one way that I was looking at it was currently, in its current incarnation, ChatGPT and LLMs, as they're called, if you've not heard that term, is like that's what that category is. They almost take like, they do the part of the work that I would like and would give me the part that I hate. Like, I don't want a world where the fun part of my job about writing code is writing that new function, writing that thing that's solving the problem. And then the unfun part of my job is when I've made that mistake and I gotta go find the bug. Yeah. And if ChatGPT is like doing the design part and giving me the solution and all I have to do is go find their bug, well, that sounds pretty horrible. And so I think it will be many years before that it becomes that, and I'm just like the technician that is debugging the AI's code. And I feel pretty safe in my job in that way. And I'm hoping that that's not the future of programming, because like, why would people do it at that point? Like the joy, much of the joy for me at least, is that creation element of it.
What is that new term called? Engineering prompt or prompt engineer?
Prompt engineer, yeah. I would not want to be a prompt engineer for sure.
So,
Any thoughts on AI stuff?
No, I think if it's an existential threat to our industry or any industries, then why waste time thinking about it? Just go about your job, and the skills and the mindset that we have will carry us.
Yeah. Well, I feel like AI is a good question to cap off this discussion this evening. It's like the future state. We've talked about some of the history and everything in between. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to jump up there and hit the stop in the recording, but I appreciate all your questions tonight. Hopefully you've learned something along the way, so thanks.